It would be the participants. So you're logged in and Sylvia's logged in, that's the check.
It's been the hell long here. It's been like there's a creepy working difficulty, so it's so free to fall for that also. Excellent. Some things, yeah. Some much is good. We were paying it too. So good. Yeah, we're basically, yeah. I can feel that from the part. Also, make sure. I think I know splendid purpose. No splendid. No, I see. He's with the her.
Oh, that you walked in.
But it worked for me.
Right, because you're looking at.
We've known each other since we were 10. Yeah, exactly, yeah. Back in the day. Yeah, you guys are looking at each other again. Oh, yeah. And I knew his dad. Before, yeah, kindergarten teacher at my local school.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Oh, that is clean. I just meant this year. Oh, yeah, there's some people that actually.
Yeah.
This fall was very.
I do like watching the other 80 something.
Yeah, mom with his.
Okay, we had somebody answer.
Yeah.
He said when we were kids.
Watching that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Mayor Brinkman is my wrestling coach in high school. He's wrestling coach for the community, yeah. Okay, I can see. Yeah.
Right, I think we can get started.
Great, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Lisa Costa Sanders. I'm retained by the city to assist with the planning, review, and project management of the proposed Tanforan development project. I'm joined by Heidi Mickelson. She's from ICF, and that's the consulting firm that we've retained to complete the environmental review on behalf of the city. So we forgot to advance our slides, I think we are. Okay. The purpose of the meeting this evening is to provide information on the EIR process and the project, describe the analysis and conclusions of the draft EIR, and receive input on the draft EIR. So no action will be taken tonight, no decisions. Separate hearings though will be held on the merits of the project later this year. The format for this meeting is I'm going to provide a brief overview of the project, and Heidi will discuss the CEQA analysis. Following our presentation, in-person attendees will have the opportunity to provide written and oral comments. And if you wish to comment, there's a form on the table right there. You can fill that out and you can hand it over to Kelly, and then she'll announce your name if you wish to make a verbal comment at the meeting, or you can submit it in writing and we'll record that. If you're on the webinar, you will provide information at the end on how you can provide written comments, and you can always submit the comments after the meeting as well. So it's important to note at this meeting, we're really just giving you the information and receiving your comments. We're not going to be responding to any comments or answering any questions tonight. We will respond though formally in writing to all comments received in the final EIR, and you will receive notification of when that EIR is available. Lost it. Yeah, you want to move ahead one? Great, thanks. So just to give you a little bit of background, based on the information that the Tanforan Mall would be closing and the property would be put up for sale. In July of 2021, City Council approved and issued the Reimagining Tanforan Land Use Fact Sheet. And that was intended to guide future development of the site and show the goals of the city to have a transit-oriented mixed-use development with housing, retail, as well as life science office. In 2021 and 2022, Alexandria Real Estate Equities, the applicant, acquired all the parcels that consist of the 44-acre site. And in October of 2022, they submitted a preliminary application consistent with the city's vision for the site. They then submitted a revised formal application in May of this year, and that is currently under review. The city issued the notice of preparation on the EIR in December of 2023 and issued the draft EIR, the Environmental Impact Report, on June 27th for public review and comment. Thanks. The city also conducted extensive community outreach on this project, starting with the initial city council review in October 2022. We hosted 13 different community open house events. I think a few of you were at those in November of 2022, as well as launched a community survey that ran through February of 2023. Information from those outreach events was presented to the city council in what was called the Community Priorities Progress Report in March of 2023. An additional open house event was held in May of 2024, and the City Council and Planning Commission held a joint meeting in November of 2024 to review the project and provide some feedback. Following that meeting, we held 2 community open house events in December of 2024, and the City Council and Planning Commission again reviewed the project as it's evolved in a joint meeting in March of this year. If you're all familiar with the site, as you know, it's the Tanforan Mall located on El Camino. It's also the parcel on Sneed, just north of the site. As indicated, the owner is Alexandria Real Estate Equities, and the site's 44 acres in area. The project approvals will include a general plan amendment, plan development zoning, plan development plan, tentative map, and a development agreement. So to give you a little bit of overview on the project, as I stated earlier, it is consistent with the City Council's stated vision for the site as a transit-oriented development that includes a diverse mix of uses, including housing, office, life science, retail, and open space with sustainable infrastructure. The project does propose over 1,000 multifamily housing units, a new retail village with a central green open space. They will be retaining the Target store and plan to do some upgrades, as well as retaining the Century Theater, and as well making some improvements to that theater complex. The project also includes new internal streets and substantial landscape improvements. As this project is going to be built over time, the applicant has submitted a flex zone approach that provides flexibility to respond to changing market conditions in the future. Within the flex zone blocks, the areas could be developed either as housing or as life science, depending on the market conditions at the time. And that could result in an additional 500 housing units, and it could also include a hotel. This is the conceptual rendering submitted by the applicant. So you'll see the top left corner has the residential building design. And then to the right of that on the top is the retail village concept, an amenity pavilion located middle left, conceptual views then of the different life science buildings to the right in that bottom left. Alexandria's concept for the campus is to have unique architecture for each of the life science buildings, as well as for the residential buildings. So it won't be like, for example, the Oracle complex where everything looks the same. It'll have diverse architecture. I'll now hand it off to Heidi, who will discuss the environmental review process. How are we doing on that clicker?
Right when the clicker started working. It was working.
You're gonna get a new battery.
Good luck. Are you able to advance?
Yeah,
it,
I just
Kelly?
gotta get to the screen. All right,
Thank you.
Okay, you can go ahead and advance it to the one after this. Great, thank you. Okay, so welcome, everybody. As Lisa mentioned, my name is Heidi Mickelson. I'm with ICF. We're the city's CEQA consultant, and I'm here to walk you through the environmental impact assessment, which is the reason that we're here tonight. As Lisa mentioned, to receive comments on the draft EIR. So I will be providing you with an overview, starting with the main purposes of CEQA, which is the California Environmental Quality Act. A brief high-level overview of the environmental review process under CEQA. The purpose of this comment hearing, we'll go over the EIR contents and the issues that we looked at in the EIR. We'll go over the impact determinations that were made in the EIR, focusing on the significant and unavoidable impacts that were identified in the EIR. And we'll close with next steps and opportunities for input, and then, of course, time for receiving public comments. Next slide. The main purpose of CEQA, which again is the California Environmental Quality Act, which was enacted in 1970, it's threefold really. And just a quick step back, CEQA applies to any project that requires a discretionary approval from a local agency if it's not otherwise deemed exempt from CEQA. So once you determine that your project is subject to CEQA, the purposes of doing CEQA for a project are to provide information to the decision makers and the public regarding the potential environmental impacts of a project, to identify ways to mitigate or avoid the significant impacts of the project through either mitigation measures or alternatives or even revisions to the project design, and to provide avenues for public participation. And as we'll go over in a minute, there are several points in the CEQA process, particularly for an EIR, where those opportunities for public input are provided. Next slide. The CEQA process for this project, as Lisa went over, began with submittal of the preliminary project application in October 22, at which time the city, as the lead agency under CEQA, determined that an environmental impact report or an EIR would be required for the project. An EIR, CEQA provides for a variety of different types of analyses and documents to be prepared for a project. An EIR is the most extensive and comprehensive type of document that you can prepare for a project under CEQA. The EIR process kicked off in December 2023 with the issuance of the notice of preparation, which lets everybody know that an EIR is being prepared and asks for input on what the scope and contents of that analysis should look like. Then on January 16th, 2024, we held an EIR scoping meeting, which is part of that NOP process, and is a public meeting similar to this, where we received comments on what the scope and contents of the draft EIR should include. Now we are at the circulate draft EIR stage here, the bullet in the middle. The draft EIR was prepared based on the input that we received from the NOP scoping process. It was released for public review on June 27th, and the public review period will close on August 11th. So we are at the point now where we're collecting comments from the public and from agencies on the draft EIR analysis. Looking ahead to the future, the next steps will, and then there's the draft EIR public meeting on July 29th. That's today, of course. Looking ahead to the final two bullet points, the next step in the process is to prepare the final EIR. So in the final EIR, we take all of the comments that were received on the draft EIR, including any comments that you provide tonight, either verbally or in writing. We respond to all of those comments in writing, and then we make any revisions that are deemed necessary to the draft EIR analysis in the final EIR based on those comments. And together, the draft and the final EIRs become EIR for the project. Then sometime in the fall or winter of this year, we expect that final EIR process to be complete and for public hearings on both the EIR and the project to commence. So that will be at that point, Planning Commission and Council will be deciding not only to approve the project, but also to whether or not to certify the EIR, which would be required in order to approve the project. Next slide. Lisa talked a lot about this, so I'll just quickly do a quick reminder that this meeting is intended to be an opportunity for the public and affected agencies to comment on the draft EIR pertaining to the sufficiency of the analysis and ways in which the significant effects of the project might be avoided or mitigated. This is what CEQA tells us is should be the focus of public comments and agency comments on the draft EIR. What this meeting is not is an approval hearing or a meeting where we will be responding to the comments in real time. Next slide. So the EIR analysis is based on Appendix G of the CEQA guidelines, and this appendix lays out about 20 different resource areas that should be evaluated under CEQA. This draft EIR included detailed analyses of 16 of those topics listed here. They include air quality, biological resources, cultural resources, energy, geology and soils, greenhouse gas emissions, hazards and hazardous materials, hydrology and water quality, land use and planning, noise and vibration, population and housing, public services, recreation, transportation, tribal cultural resources, and utilities and service systems. So as you can see, we looked at pretty much all the things. We'd like to call this a kitchen sink EIR. Next slide. An EIR under CEQA is also required to evaluate alternatives to the project, though those alternatives can be evaluated in less detail than the project. This is really a core tenet of CEQA because alternatives can be ways to avoid or reduce the significant impacts of a project, which, going back to the fundamental purposes of CEQA, is one of the main purposes of CEQA. So this EIR evaluated 3 alternatives, including a no project, no build alternative. That's basically just maintaining conditions as they are today on the project site. The no project alternative is a required alternative to evaluate under CEQA. We also looked at an existing zoning alternative. So the goal of that alternative was to see what would happen if the project site was built out in accordance with the existing zoning restrictions on the site. Under that alternative, there would be some conversion of some of the mall uses into a fun zone, a Dave and Buster's type thing, which our analysis showed that would be a likely outcome based on market conditions for the mall itself, as well as development of 1,000 dwelling units on the site, residential dwelling units on the site, because that is permitted under the existing PD zoning that was approved for the site with the adoption of the city's housing element. We also looked at a reduced density alternative. And under this alternative, the residential component of the project would remain the same. There would be no reduction in the minimum number of residential units that could be built. But the non-residential uses on the site would be reduced by about 20%. And the reason that we looked at that was to see what happens if you do less construction, how that would primarily affect construction-related impact of the project, as well as some operational air emission impacts. The EIR also considered the evaluation of 6 other alternatives, but ultimately rejected them based on inconsistency with the project objectives, infeasibility, or just an inability to reduce or avoid the significant impacts of the project. So those are listed here, and those included an offsite alternative, an alternative with no residential uses, an alternative with fewer residential uses, an alternative with more residential uses, an alternative that did not involve non-daytime or nighttime construction activities. We'll talk about those a little later. And an alternative that included a revised construction phase. Next slide. All right, so CEQA establishes 4 different levels of impact. Those include no impact, less than significant impact, a less than significant impact with mitigation, and significant and unavoidable impacts. So everything that we look at eventually falls into one of those buckets once we do our analysis. So the next few slides present the draft EIR findings at a high level, again, focusing on the impacts that were identified as significant and unavoidable. But we'll go over each of those 4 buckets that I just mentioned. So for these impact categories shown on this slide, the draft EIR concluded that there would be no impact on the environment. And it's primarily because these types of resources just don't occur on the project site. So these are things like agriculture and forestry resources, certain categories of biological resources like wetlands, conflicts with habitat conservation plans, impacts related to septic systems, flood hazards, tsunami risks, mineral resources, and wildfire. Those are things that affect some projects in more rural areas, but are not issues for this particular project or this site. Next slide. So then we move on to the impacts that were found to be less than significant. So those include some impacts under the umbrella of air quality, particularly conflicts with air quality plans and odors. Also impacts to heritage and protected trees, impacts to human remains. So this is what happens if you accidentally uncover human remains during construction. Impacts to conflicts with renewable energy plans, various different impacts related to geology and soils, including fault rupture, seismic related hazards and ground failure, soil erosion and expansive soils. Impacts to greenhouse gases, including the greenhouse gas emissions themselves, and conflicts with adopted GHG reduction plans. This is largely due to the fact that this is an urban infill site where we're placing a lot of housing and job opportunities directly adjacent to a BART station, a public transit station. So that in effect reduces a lot of vehicular mobile source greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. And then continuing on with the less than significant impacts, impacts related to the routine transfer of hazardous materials, interference with emergency response plans and wildland fires, hydrology impacts related to groundwater supply and recharge, and conflicts with water quality control plans. Again, these are all less than significant impacts. Land use impacts related to dividing established communities, vibration impacts, impacts related to unplanned population growth or the displacement of people or housing, and then impacts to public services, including police, fire, schools, and the libraries. Last slide. And, sorry, next slide. And then wrapping up our less than significant impacts, we have impacts on recreational facilities or parks and recreational facilities. Transportation impacts related to conflicts with transportation, bicycle and pedestrian plans, vehicle miles traveled, again, largely due to the proximity to the BART station, vehicle hazards and emergency access. And then under the umbrella of utilities, we found less than significant impacts related to water supply, wastewater treatment, and solid waste. All right, next slide. So then moving to our third bucket of impacts, these are impacts that we found to be significant in the draft DIR. And we were able to develop mitigation measures. So these are requirements that the applicant or the city or whoever the responsible party is will be required to implement for the proposed project. And with implementation of those mitigation measures, we determined that the impacts would be less than significant, but they only get to less than significant with these specific mitigation measures in the DIR. So these impacts include criteria pollutant emissions. These are air pollutants that are regulated by the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. We look at that both during construction and during operation of the project. Impacts to nesting birds. So we have mitigation in the EIR in case nesting birds are in any trees during construction. And then also lighting impacts and what we call bird strike. So this is birds because of the proximity to the bay. This is birds striking the buildings, the glass, the translucent surfaces. So there's mitigation measures in the EIR to prevent that from happening. Cultural resources, both known historical resources. The site has a good deal of history around it, including a commemorative memorial. So there is mitigation in the EIR to ensure the preservation of that. And then any potential unreported resources. So those are things that you might find in the ground when you're doing construction. Energy, the wasteful or inefficient use of energy. Geology, again, similar to the cultural resources, there's mitigation for any potential paleontological finds during construction. And then hazards, specifically placement on listed hazardous material sites, which do occur on the site. Upset accident conditions involving the release of hazardous materials and airspace intrusion. So this has to do with the proximity to SFO. Next slide. Additional impacts that are less than significant with mitigation include water quality impacts and alterations to drainage patterns. Conflicts with land use plans, specifically, we looked at the project's consistency with SFO's airport land use compatibility plan, which does identify residential uses as incompatible uses within the airport's noise contour zone that occurs on the site. So there's mitigation in the EIR to address that impact. Operational noise from mechanical equipment and generators, as well as airport noise, again, tying back to the evaluation of the ALUCP. There's impacts and mitigation for tribal cultural resources in case any tribal resources are uncovered during construction. And then lastly, the construction and relocation of utility facilities. Next slide. So that leaves us with the significant and unavoidable impacts that were identified in the EIR. There are two significant unavoidable impacts that were identified in this EIR. Those include health risks to sensitive receptors during construction, and also noise impacts from concrete pour activities during non-daytime hour construction. So as you can see, these are primarily construction-related impacts. This is not uncommon for a project of this site. It is a large site, it is a large project, and oftentimes projects of this size in urban areas where there are sensitive residential receptors nearby do result in significant and unavoidable impacts during construction. Next slide. So the specific impact, again, there's several different impacts under each topic that we look at. The specific impact that was determined to be significant and unavoidable under air quality was impact AQ3. And the impact is again involving the exposure of sensitive receptors to substantial toxic air contaminant concentrations from the combined effects of construction and operations. So talk a little bit about what that means. Next slide. Basically, what our analysis, we do a detailed modeling of the air emissions that would occur from both construction and operation of the project. And what we found is that the combination of diesel particulate matter that would be emitted both during construction and during operation over the course of 30 years of operation, as well as PM 2.5, which is another type of particulate matter, could expose adjacent receptors to significant health risks. We also found that on-site receptors could experience significant health risks related to potential cancer risk exposure from the combined construction and operational emissions over the course of 30 years. So the primary source of this impact is PM 2.5 from off-road equipment activity and earth moving activities. Dust is generated when construction occurs, and vehicle travel during construction. So again, that's a construction-based source. And then a couple of operational sources as well. And when you combine those together over the course of 30 years, the standard that the Air Quality Management District provides could potentially be exceeded. Those operational sources would be diesel particulate matter from generator testing, diesel particulate matter from operational truck traffic, and then toxic air contaminants from the on-site laboratory uses. These are the research and development R&D uses that could have things like fume hoods. Next slide. So even though the impact was determined to be significant and unavoidable, that doesn't mean that we stop there and we don't do everything that we can to mitigate that impact. CEQA requires the lead agency to mitigate any significant impacts to the extent feasible. So the mitigation measures that are included in the EIR, there's 5 of them that address this impact. They're listed here on this slide. They include things like using clean diesel powered or electric equipment during construction. And these are just the titles of the mitigation measures. These are very detailed prescriptive mitigation measures, some of which are multiple paragraphs long. But these are just the titles here. If you want the full details of the mitigation, that information is absolutely in the draft EIR. Other mitigation measures include implementing the Bay Area Air Quality Management District's basic construction best management practices to reduce dust emissions, using low VOC, that's volatile organic compound coatings during project operation. Those are the fumes that occur with paints. Replacing gas powered landscape equipment with zero emissions landscape equipment, and installing high efficiency air filtration systems in the residential units themselves, since that cancer impact that I mentioned in a previous slide is on the future residential residences of the project site. Next slide. So that takes us to our second significant and unavoidable impact, which is impacts from non-daytime or nighttime construction noise. This impact determined that project construction would generate a substantial temporary or permanent increase in ambient noise levels in the vicinity of the project in excess of standards established in the local general plan or noise ordinance or applicable standards of other agencies. So that's the wording that CEQA gives us in that Appendix 2 checklist. What does that actually mean? I'll walk you through it in the next slide. So this project would have concrete pours during nighttime. And again, this is not uncommon for projects of this size. Because my understanding is, not being a construction contractor, is that because of the nature of concrete pouring and the temperature control which is required for concrete pouring and the overall vehicle fleet and coordination that is required during these massive concrete pours, these generally need to occur at night. And this project, we assumed, could include up to 100 instances of nighttime concrete pours. That would be over the entire 3-year, 4-year construction duration. And we determined that the city has noise standards in its noise ordinance. Of course, the standard is a lot lower during nighttime. So because of those concrete pours, when they occur, there would be a potential for the noise generated by those trucks to exceed the city's nighttime construction noise standards. This impact could be reduced by mitigation, and we included mitigation. I'll walk you through what that requires in the next slide. But because there still could be a potential for the levels to exceed the city standards, in some instances, we conservatively concluded that this would be significant and unavoidable. Next slide. There are 2 mitigation measures. Again, these are just the titles of the measures themselves. These measures are quite lengthy and detailed, and the full text of these measures can be found in the EIR. But essentially what they require is the development of a detailed construction noise control plan to reduce outside standard construction hours, reduce noise during nighttime hours. A noise control plan is a detailed plan that's subject to city approval that includes all the details on what's going to be coming into the site, when it will be operating, what types of equipment and vehicles will be used, et cetera. And most importantly, what types of best management practices and mitigation measures will be employed to reduce the noise from all of that construction activity. There's also a requirement to construct a temporary noise barrier along any project perimeter where nighttime construction would occur within 500 feet of any sensitive receptor. So you may be familiar with these types of barriers if you've seen any large construction site, and the data show that construction noise barriers are actually quite effective at reducing construction noise. And I believe that concludes my part of the presentation on the draft EIR. Thank you.
Yeah, great. So if you're here in person, you can submit verbal or written comments and we'll track those down. As I indicated, please fill out the sheet that's located on that table and you can hand it to Kelly. If you're on Zoom or viewing this later, you may submit written comments from now until the end of the day on August 11th. You can mail your comments to the address on the screen or email them to tanforan@sanbruno.ca.gov. All comments will be included in the final EIR and they will be responded to. So please include your email address on that comment so we can let you know when the final EIR is available. As I indicated, we're not going to be responding to comments tonight. This is to receive those and respond formally in the EIR. Next one. So no decisions will be made on the project tonight. We do anticipate public hearings on the project for rezoning, EIR, and development agreement. That would occur potentially at the Planning Commission meeting on October 29th of this year. And then the City Council requires 2 hearings to consider the item. So it's tentatively scheduled for November 12th and November 25th. We do have a project website where a lot of this information is available, all the project plans, upcoming meetings, past information, that's at tanforanforsanbruno.com. Feel free to go on that if you would like some more information. That concludes our presentation, so we are happy to take your comments at this time. Thank you. Really, do you have?
You have one sheet from Ison at OPAD.
Hello, my name is Ison. I wanted to thank you presenters for your EIR report. I'm a longtime San Bruno resident and my family still has property in the 5th edition. Mostly their home was affected by south line. They were within, I believe, that 500 feet distance, and the air particulates I noticed actually floating around still in that area. There is a study that's being done with South City Rise and UC Davis, where there's some CARTA air pollution monitors that are being placed in homeowners on their properties where it's measuring the air pollutants. And I would like to hope that that is being addressed for all of the locals who are being affected by this. For the flex zone that's recommended and the hotel or potential additional housing, I've heard in city council meetings where the recommendation is that the zoning might change and potentially 8 floors would be built. That's with, I guess, the green light from the environmental studies, if that's okay with the noise pollution that's coming from SFO. Me personally, I would not want to see 8-level hotels. I would not want to see 8-level apartments. I think 6 is okay with respect to what we have. That's the highest level. Maybe that would be the top of BART, or Walmart headquarters would possibly be the tallest building that we have. I would like to ask for some monetary funds for all of the homes that are within the parameters that are most affected on El Camino and Huntington Avenue. This is a request that I would have made on the behalf of all the tenants that my family has that are closer to Tanforan Avenue. But I do have family that are affected that live on Huntington Avenue, and I would like to see them compensated for the inconvenience that they're going to be suffering with the noise pollution as well as the air pollution. They have little children that live in those households, and I would like to see all of the neighborhoods compensated for that inconvenience that they're going to have. I'm just going to throw out a dollar amount, 25,000 for each house. This is open to discussion. And I would also like the Tanforan developers to consider donating maybe $4 million to the San Bruno Community Foundation Fund that was closed. That could be opened in a more traditional sense, and there would be community organizers that could request and apply for grants from that fund since it was closed this year. Thank you for your consideration.
I just have a question. How many housing units are they planning on? And how many parking units per household? Are they, has that been thrown out yet?
Yeah, so the project does include the initial base project, 1,014 housing units. And then with that flex zone, it could go up as high as 1,514 housing units. And they're proposing about 1 parking space per unit, and then some additional guest parking loading zones.
So some of the units are gonna be where the stores are also, right?
They're mostly along the sea, yeah.
So is there gonna be plenty of parking for those that wanna shop?
There's additional parking for the retail, yes.
But when parking per unit, what if there's 2 or 3 cars per unit?
That is actually a high parking standard in this transit zone. The state is actually has a law in effect that they could build this with 0 parking.
And if you would like that to be considered a comment on the EIR, I would just ask that you fill out a comment sheet taken.
Do you have any other comment slips?
You don't have any other comment slips?
Is it okay if I submit one now, or is it too late?
Yes, of course.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
We're
Anyone
here,
can.
we're here.
We're collecting these to make sure that we have everybody's names and email information, because that's how we'll respond to the comment.
So thanks everyone for being here tonight. So my name is Matt. I'm a former employee for the city and I'm a resident in District 3. So I had a couple questions, and I do have a little bit of background doing planning myself and some environmental review. So these are just kind of some clarifying questions I had for staff. So I was glad to see that there was a comment about mitigation of biological resources for nesting birds. And just for context, 4 residents went out and canvassed the 5th edition neighborhood this past weekend. We asked residents about some of their experiences with redevelopment of Tanforan during the last iteration of BART, and then also their experience with the Southline project. And so I'm just kind of summarizing a little bit of what I heard in an anonymous way. But one thing that came up for people was nesting birds, and they noted that the last time that that site had extensive redevelopment, that there were a bunch of birds that were landing into their yards. So I'm glad that there's going to be, I'm asking if there's going to be perhaps like a biological study and folks that are going to be looking into that, hopefully. Other comment was about greenhouse gas emissions and transportation, about the trip generation analysis, and how are you modeling some of the trip generation that may be taking place for the different types of trips. And I say that because some folks had said to me in the past that Target tends to get more people that drive rather than take transit, for example. And I also heard from our own engineers in the city that one of the reasons why they chose to not take away a lane of traffic for the cycle track that was installed is because they anticipated there was going to be more vehicle traffic because of the Southline project and eventually for Tanforan. So I just wanted to check in to kind of see, are there going to be MT strategies that are going to be utilized so that we can, make the numbers work, I guess. Next question was about water supply. When we canvassed the neighborhood, residents had concerns and questions about whether the water supply would be sufficient. Folks had mentioned that we do have a Briar city that relies, I think, about 50% of our water is groundwater. So just making sure that we have enough for all the new development there. Another question on cultural resources was about whether we'd be able to engage some of the same folks who were on the committee to develop that heritage site around the BART station. If we could engage the Japanese American community as part of the cultural monitoring, in case there's any cultural resources that are uncovered as part of the construction. For toxic air, before I get to that, question about a wind study to make sure that there's extensive wind studies that are taken into effect. We had a number of residents who made comments that they felt like a lot of the wind patterns were pushing the air from both Tanforan and Southline at different parts of the day. And so they were concerned about, for example, with the Southline project, that there was a lot of debris that was coming off the site that wasn't getting taken care of. So that was an area of concern for them. So whether it's, hopefully that could inform some of the practices, if those were not already taken into account. One thing that we heard in particular is that during the painting of the BART station, that there was a bunch of paint that was flying onto the residents, and they had to get their cars and windows redone by the developer because of that. And then the last thing I guess I wanted to bring up was for toxic air contaminants. I'm hoping that one of the alternatives for the project would consider a use that did not include the operational toxic air, I guess it's the life science use that would be causing that. But to me, that seems like it's a really significant impact because it's not just during construction phase, but it could be operational, and over the lifespan of 30 years seems like it would have really negative effects on the residents there. So if there's an opportunity to look at an alternative that could still be viable for the developer, I think probably a lot of community members want to see that. And that was it for my comments, and I encourage other people to make public comment if you'd like to.
Any other?
Hi, so my name is George. I actually live across the street from BART. So they've been doing some work there and the noise, they were pretty good about it. There was some noise when they were doing the BART, the actual transit station, I think, that was at night and it was overwhelming, like it shakes the ground and it was, I had no idea what it was. I was like, it sounded like someone was cutting wood inside my house, like cutting the house. But yeah, so anything they can do to mitigate noise, I don't feel like a sound barrier is really gonna help much. I mean, how high is it gonna be? Like 10 feet high or something like that? I feel like it would go over it. So the flyer that they sent out mentioned air filters inside the house and possibly windows, which I'm interested in. Some of the houses have them from the airport, but I didn't respond or whatever, so I don't. But yeah, anything that can help with that would be great. But obviously some, oh, and the flex zones that they talk about are kind of scary because switching, the life zones are kind of, life science seems like it's a good addition to the neighborhood, but if you switch it all to apartments, it's like a big 180, so that's kind of scary. It's like totally different, but that's all I got to say. Thank you.
I'm sorry, you mentioned a flyer.
This thing was on my. You guys haven't seen it?
I don't think that's from the city, maybe from and.
You guys wanna see it? Oh, you guys can pass it around, take a picture wherever you want.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm like across the street from BART, so they sent us all that.
And I'll also just add, if anybody would not like to make a oral comment today, there's also a space where if you'd like to write a comment, you're welcome to just fill this out and hand it to us. And there's also the ability to email or mail comments that come up as you review them.
Other comments?
When exactly is Tanforan gonna be closed?
A few of the stores, as you know, are closed, and
Without
so
pennies.
they're working with the tenants to see what's, because it really affects their leases, right? So if I know it'll be open through this year, and then we don't have an exact closure date yet.
Pennies is.
Target will remain open, Cinnamon will remain open. Any other comments on the EIR? Thank you for attending this evening. There will be notification of the future meetings, and go ahead and take a look at the website for information, and then we have through August 11th if you'd like to submit a comment on the EIR. Thank you.